My first horse was the best first horse and the worst first horse, which we will get into. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Strong in the Saddle. I'm your host, Katrina, and today I wanted to talk about buying your first horse as a beginner. And why I specify as a beginner is because if you've been riding, maybe leasing a horse or riding at a barn and you have experience riding, it's a little bit different than when you're brand new to horses and you're considering buying a horse right off the bat. So we're going to talk about some things to look for and to consider when you're buying your first horse as a beginner, because making the wrong decision, buying the wrong horse can be a big problem. It can be a very, very big problem that I want you to avoid if at all possible. So before we get into what to look for, I just want to kind of give a bit of background on my first horse, because she was definitely very, very pivotal in the start of my lifetime with horses. So my first horse, her name was Brandy. I have no idea what breed she was. She was not registered. We think she was some sort of like draft, but also maybe like a quarter horse mix, because she had the feathers on her legs, but she was very, very short. Like, she was at the precipice of being considered a pony just based on height. She had a very, 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 very thick mane and tail. She had the feathers. She was gray. She had brands all over her hips. I don't know how many brands she had. None that we put on her. They were all pre-existing. And yeah, we purchased her off a coworker of my mom for, I believe it was $650. We had this one old granary full of years and years of bottles and like recycling and stuff like that. We took it to the bottle depot and got the cash, and that is what we used to buy Brandy with. And we bought her sight unseen. I had no idea. I never rode the horse or anything before we purchased her. We borrowed another neighbor's trailer and truck, and we went and picked up this horse. We had no idea what we were getting into, and that was kind of the start. I pretty early on got into 4-H with her, and she taught me a lot, but at the same time, we had issues. So I was brand new and very, very nervous and had very low confidence on a horse. Brandy was perfect for that because she spooked at basically nothing. She would stand very, very still and just like let me figure out what I had going on, and just was very much that very calm animal that I needed for my first horse. But as I started gaining more confidence and wanted to do maybe some more advanced, they weren't even really advanced things, but just like getting more into riding and stuff, she was not the greatest, because for the life of me as a beginner, I could not get her to lope. I think I loped on her once in the entire time that we had her. And she was also not, as far as like maneuverability, she was definitely lacking in that department, which was very, very frustrating as a rider. She was very, very stubborn, which caused a lot of tears for me because I would just get so frustrated with her sometimes, and yeah, just did not always make it fun for me. We also didn't know how old she was. We knew she was older when we got her. At the end, we ended up having to put her down. Gray horses are susceptible to cancer, and that's what happened to her. She ended up getting cancer, and it got to a point where we had to put her down. But I did receive a lot of great education from her. Again, got frustrated more times than I can count with her because of just maybe her lack of more refined training. I think she was more suited to being a trail horse for sure, but definitely learned a lot from her. So before we get any further, the first thing that I want to say, I think parents especially, they get this idea that they're going to buy their child a young horse and the horse and the child are going to grow and learn together, just like maybe you would buy your kids a puppy and then that puppy can grow into a dog and like grow with your children. It is not the same at all. You have to remember that horses are their own thing. They are flight animals, and buying a beginner rider a young or inexperienced horse is a recipe for disaster. So please, if you are a beginner or are looking at a horse for a beginner rider, do not buy a young horse. A young horse needs someone who is experienced, who can show that horse what to do, who can provide assurance for that horse. And, you know, like the horse is leaning on the person when a horse is young. When you are a beginner, you are the one looking for that assurance, that direction, which you can get from an older horse. So when someone is looking for a horse as a beginner, I definitely recommend that you get something a little bit older. I would say around 8 to 15 is probably the optimal age range. If you're getting younger than 8, the horse might be well trained, but it might not have the experience that a beginner needs. And as we get older, an older horse obviously has a limited lifetime left and might also have some growing health concerns that might not be optimal. So I would say 8 to 15 is the optimal range. Obviously, there's going to be horses that are suitable for a beginner that fall outside of that range, but if you're just starting your search, that's what I would aim for to start with. A more mature horse is going to be a lot better for a beginner rider. They're going to hopefully have had, you know, a significant amount of training at that point. They're going to have some life experience in different scenarios. An older horse, I feel like they're going to be more set in their ways, just have a bit more consistent behavior. When you look at a young horse, they're kind of, I feel like they're a little bit all over the place. Sometimes they might be calm, sometimes they might be a complete basket case, and you know, as they get older, they kind of even out a little bit, which is very, very helpful for a beginner rider, especially if you're not able to ride every day like a lot of amateur riders are not able to. Older horses also have, you know, a bit more lower energy. And I will just say, all of these are generalizations. Obviously, horses are all individuals and it's going to vary from horse to horse, but as a general rule, these apply. So, you know, the older the horse, generally the lower energy that they are, which is again good for a beginner. They tend to be a bit less spooky because again, they've been trained and they've also had experience. So like seeing, I don't know, some cattle in chutes at a rodeo, they've seen that before, so it's not a big deal at this point. They're just gonna move on with their day. And just older horses are just a bit more reliable. And going back to what I said earlier, that allows the rider to kind of put their trust in the horse and kind of like, if the rider is in a situation, like say they're going to their first horse show, if it's not the horse's first horse show, the rider can kind of rely on that a little bit. And even though the rider might be nervous, they can take comfort in the fact that the horse kind of has an idea of what's going on. They've been through this before. You know, the rider can kind of lean on that a little bit, which brings a bit of comfort to a beginner rider, I would say. At least for me, it definitely would. In general, older horses, as I said, have had more training and generally have a bit more of a calmer demeanor. But I just want to say, that's not always the case. There are many, many horses out there that are significantly older who have not been trained as much as you would think for an older horse. There are definitely horses that are like double or triple Diesel's age and are not as well trained as he is at 5, right? And additionally, there are horses who are older and are still complete yahoos. It's just in their blood, they're anything but calm. And again, going back to Diesel, Diesel is 5 years old, but he has a very, very calm demeanor. And so again, it's going back to horses are individuals, but if you're leaning towards the older horses, it's going to improve the odds that you're going to find something that is more trained and a bit calmer overall in its demeanor. And that's kind of the next thing I wanted to talk about, just overall demeanor and temperament for a horse that's going to be used for a beginner. So I kind of did up a list of things that I want to look for as far as temperament goes for a horse that I would be looking for a beginner rider. So obviously you want a horse that's calm and relaxed regardless of the situation. Now obviously there is going to be times where regardless of the horse's experience, they're going to have issues in certain situations. If there's, I don't know, fireworks are a big thing that horses don't really like, but as a general rule, we want a horse that's just calm and cool. We want a horse that's relatively friendly, and some people want a sociable horse. I don't really think that's necessary. If I look to Junior, he's the perfect beginner horse. He's not really sociable though. He kind of keeps to himself. He's not looking for constant attention. He'll, have a quick scratch and then he's moving on. You want a horse that's patient. I know for me, this was a big one because there was many times where I would be in the arena with my horse. I would be on the ground, terrified to get on. And I needed a horse that was going to stand there, not move for however long until I collected myself and got the courage to get on. And then once I got on, I needed that horse to continue standing very, very still until I found the courage to move. That takes a very, 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 very patient horse. And I think that's a big one for a beginner horse because, for me as an experienced horse person, I can fly through grooming, tacking up, getting on, giddy up, let's go, right? A beginner, they're learning how things work. They're not quite sure what they're doing. Everything takes longer. You need a patient horse for that, right? So that's definitely a big one. You want a horse that's easy to handle. You don't want a horse I know my horses were always hard to catch when I was first starting out. So frustrating. But you want a horse that can load in a trailer decently, will stand quietly when it's tied and you're tacking up, stuff like that. You want them to be able to pick up their feet without an issue. All of those kind of things. Standing for when you're getting on and getting off. That's the last thing a beginner needs, is a horse that's dancing around when they're trying to get in and out of the saddle. And you want something that's just well trained enough that when the beginner is trying to figure out training or riding aids, that they're going to give the right response. And that was the frustrating thing with Brandy, my first horse, is I would, cue her for a lope and she would not lope. And as a beginner, I'm like, am I cueing her wrong? Or is she just not listening to me, right? And that is very, very confusing for a beginner. You also want a horse that's very, very forgiving. If I accidentally ride with reins or one rein that's too long, or if I accidentally bump them in the mouth because my hands aren't quite figured out yet, or if I'm kind of sloppy with my leg cues, or if my bum is bouncing in the saddle when I'm trying to figure out how to post at a trot, you want a horse that's going to be okay, that's kind of annoying, but I'm gonna just keep going on and just ignore it. And they're forgiving, right? They're not frazzled by things like that. Like if you did that on a young horse, there might be some issues, right? If you're like bumping, they might really take offense to that, overreact. If you're bumping in the saddle, that could potentially trigger a buck or something. If you accidentally bump them with their legs, that might be a runaway situation. So you want something that's not trigger happy like that, and that's going to kind of be forgiving when you're making those mistakes as you're learning to ride. I think then someone looking for a horse would be like, well, how do I know if a horse has a good temperament, a good demeanor for me as a beginner rider? So I did up a bit of a list. You first want to just watch the horse from afar, just go to the edge of the pasture and just let them kind of be. Just watch what they do, whether that in the pasture, in a stall, just how are they in their natural environment? Does it look like they're pretty high strung, or does it look like they're pretty chill and just do their thing? As well, how do they interact with other horses? So Brandy, and this is where the stubbornness came in, Brandy was the top of the pecking order, and if any other of our horses kind of ticked her off or did something she didn't like or approve of, they knew about it. She would bite, she would kick. Like, she was a mean boss mare for sure. And that definitely showed through in her stubbornness under saddle. I would say you would probably want to avoid that, because again, that made me cry in so many instances because I just got so frustrated from fighting with her. On a side note, I really, really wish like my 4-H instructors, riding instructors would have helped me with that. I did not get help with that. Again, very frustrating, but that's neither here nor there. So you want something that's kind of, even bottom of the pecking order is probably fine. I'm pretty sure that's where Diesel would fall. In the dynamic between Junior and Diesel, Diesel is definitely the lower one. And that's just because he's just a chill guy, right? He just kind of, whatever, okay, I'll get out of the way. Junior's a bit more aggressive, but not really so. Like, they're just chill geldings, right? And then I would watch to see what they do when you approach them with a halter. Are they like instantly like ears up, what's going on? Or are they just kind of like, okay? How are they just handling with the halter? Do they follow you fairly easily when asked and that sort of a thing? Do they seem, I know people are going to cringe at this word, but do they seem obedient? These are large animals. They need to be obedient, especially if you're a beginner and you have no idea what the heck you're doing. You need an obedient animal. I'm sorry. You need an obedient animal. If you don't, again, recipe for disaster. Assess kind of how they are just on the ground. So again, leading, grooming. Do they just stand when you're grooming them? Can you pick up their feet easily? All those sorts of things. You don't want any major issues there. If there's issues there, there's probably going to be issues under saddle. I would probably move on to the next horse. Don't even bother, getting in the saddle and that sort of a thing. Also just kind of assess, how do they react to the stimuli in their environment? How do they react to loud noises, things that come from a distance, weird things, sitting on a fence? Again, a horse that has lots of experience generally should not be widely reacting to things like that. Like, I don't know, yesterday I was riding and all of a sudden, from the far side of the arena, a bunch of cows came up over the hill, and that's potentially it's a stimuli, right? It's like something new in the environment. An experienced horse might look and move on. A horse that's not experienced might do something, right? They might start dancing around, snorting, they might try to get away. We don't want things like that, right? We want a horse who's had experience, so when something comes in, they assess it and they move on with little to no reaction. Watching how the horse reacts when you're putting tack on them. Are they dancing around? Are they cinchy? Those are all things to watch. How are they when you try to get on the horse? We don't want them dancing around. We want them standing patiently and waiting for when you're ready. So that's all things you want to watch. And I guess I should have said this earlier on. If you're a beginner looking for a horse, get the assistance of a professional who knows what they're looking for. You obviously don't know what you're looking for, and unfortunately, sellers are not always nice to beginners. They will take advantage of you. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. They will try to tell you that this is the perfect beginner horse. He is going to take you so far. You're going to learn so much, and that may or may not be the case. And as a beginner, you likely do not know whether they are telling the truth or not. Get the help of a professional. I really, really recommend that. Find someone that you trust. Someone with a bigger name will typically, they have more at stake in terms of their name and will likely be more, credible is not the word I'm looking for, but just they're going to be hopefully more honest, especially with a person new to horses. So try to find someone who's a bit more well-known, I would say, and get their professional advice, because I can tell you all of this stuff, but again, you are a beginner, you don't know what you don't know. It's great to get the help of a professional. So I've said this quite a bit already, but you want a horse that has experience in a variety of situations. So I would say that would be trail riding, arena, just like indoor, outdoor, arena. If you want to compete or do 4-H or something like that, you want something that has experience with, riding around with other horses, especially, is the big one. And just being in various different situations, different setups, seeing different things, maybe having like a crowd present and some sort of like music going, an announcer, banners. You want a horse that has that experience, because all of that experience is going to lead to a more beginner-friendly horse. They're going to be, again, less spooky because they've been there, done that, they've seen it. They might look at things, but then again, the response to their environment will be less than a horse that has less experience, hasn't seen things. They're going to remain relatively calm because it's nothing new in the zoo. Versatility. So having experience in different disciplines, I don't know if that's necessarily a requirement for a beginner horse. I mean, a well-broke horse is a well-broke horse, which I talked about last week, just being broke versus finished. I don't think you need to look for a horse that has experience in like showing and barrel racing and reining and like various things. That's nice to have a horse that's been like tinkered with in various disciplines. But I mean, if you found like, say, a retired reining horse where that's all the horse has done is its entire life is reining, that would be good for a beginner, because again, they've had the experience of, assuming they've been competed on consistently, they've been in various situations, they're well broke, they have all those things. And again, they're broke enough that like if you wanted to go rein, you could rein. They're broke enough that maybe you could do some barrels, or if you wanted to throw an English saddle on them and go tinker with some flat work and an English saddle, like you could probably do that, right? So I don't think you necessarily need experience as far as like a bunch of disciplines, especially if you know as a beginner, which you may or may not know, if you know, like I want to go down the reining track, like you don't need a horse that has experience in a bunch of disciplines. A retired reiner, an older non-pro reiner would be perfect. A horse that has lots of experience, I have found really helps with confidence. Going back to Brandy, she didn't spook at anything, which was very helpful in building my confidence. I knew I had nothing to worry about on her back. Same with Junior to a great extent. He competed in cutting and stuff like that, and I didn't have to worry about him, spooking at cattle at the rodeo or the banners or riding around with a bunch of different horses. He had that experience built in when I got him, and I could just go off. Whereas with Diesel, he's not spooky, but he hasn't seen a lot, right? And I don't think that's suitable for a beginner. Because I do not know how he's gonna react if he sees, like, say we were at a rodeo or something and there's a bull in a chute and he's like freaking out. I don't know how Diesel would react to that. Like, I know how he reacts to the cows just out in the pasture in a different environment away from home. I don't know how he would react. That pulls at my confidence a little bit, right? Because I feel like, okay, I need to be on my toes. Something could potentially happen. A beginner doesn't need that. They're already focused enough on like left hand, right hand, left foot, right foot, my seat, my voice. Like, they got enough going on. They don't need to be worrying about the horse's reaction on top of that. I guess it kind of just goes back to safety, right? A beginner doesn't need a horse spooking in unfamiliar environments. They don't need blow up reactions. We want a calm, cool, collected, experienced, relatively well-broke horse for a beginner. That is what we're aiming for in a nutshell, because that is what is going to be safest for a beginner. I don't want a beginner rider having their world completely shattered because they have a bad experience on a bad horse. We want this to be positive. We want it to be a good start to this beginner's time with horses, right? We want it to be positive. We don't want someone ending up in the hospital or potentially worse. Again, they are very large flight animals. So that's kind of what we're aiming for. And again, I said this earlier, a horse with experience, the rider can learn from that, which is kind of cool, I think, that you can learn from a horse. I leased a horse for a long time who had been like through the ranks of 4-H several times, and I learned so much from him. I would say my riding skyrocketed once I got him. I leased him before I got Junior. He was the horse that I was riding, and I learned so much from him about refining my riding skills and also about being a competitor. He was actually the ideal first horse. Just very, like, had been there, done that, very quiet. I could rely on him. I had no second guesses about what to expect from him. Like, that is the ideal beginner horse. Another thing that I wanted to touch on before we wrap up this episode is health and soundness. So we all know that, like, as people, when we age, we typically start having some health issues and just overall aren't as spry as we were when we were younger. And that's no different for horses. As horses get older, they tend to start having health issues. If they've been rode hard, trained on, competed on as a younger horse, as they get older, they might start having some issues related to that. And so yeah, an older horse that is suitable for a beginner, I would probably say more often than not, they are going to have some sort of health issue, soundness issue, or just like maintenance that they require in order to keep them going. It's not a deal breaker, but it's just kind of like the reality of buying a horse with some age on it, right? Junior, so I bought Junior when he was 6, and he didn't have any issues at the time, but definitely as he got older, he had soundness issues from the aggressive riding that was done on him earlier on in his life. The horse that I leased, he was significantly older and he definitely had maintenance. I had to get regular chiropractor work done on him, and just kind of had to be careful. We actually would give him Bute before my horse shows just so he felt good and you couldn't detect any lameness. He actually at one point broke his pelvis. His back legs went straight out sideways when he fell on ice one winter prior to me having him. And so obviously he had soundness issues from that going forward. He wasn't lame on a day-to-day basis, and I never rode him hard enough to be concerned, but just on show days, it was we want you feeling your best. We're going to give you something to make you feel your best. Whether that's ethical or not, I don't know. I was a beginner at the time, following my trainer's instructions. Don't know. But yeah, if you're buying an older horse, they're typically going to have something that you're going to have to do. If you're buying a chunkier quarter horse, there might be metabolic concerns. So maybe having to be really careful with what you feed them. Again, some might require body work, so chiro or massage. Some might require special shoeing. Some might require hock injections. Some might just not be able to handle a really aggressive riding schedule. And, for a lot of beginners, that's just okay. They're not riding super advanced. They're not riding super hard. They might not be riding every day. So a horse that can't handle a really aggressive riding schedule, that might be the perfect fit, right? Because you're not riding that aggressively. If you're taking a horse to, even someone like me, I ride 6 days a week fairly hard. I can't have a horse who can't handle that workload. Junior cannot handle that workload. Diesel can. But yeah, that's something to be aware of. I think a lot of people harp on getting the pre-purchase done and not wanting any issues with your horse. But I think there's a bit of give and take here when you're buying a beginner horse. You might accept some soundness issues or just the cost of maintenance in exchange for this really reliable, solid, non-pro beginner horse, right? You also might be able to buy that horse a bit cheaper because there are going to be ongoing maintenance costs, and so the value of that horse is lower. Definitely still get a pre-purchase exam done before you pull the trigger on a deal, just to know what you're looking at. I don't think you want any surprises after you've bought a horse, so definitely get a vet to do a pre-purchase exam so you know what you're up against. But I would say a lot of things are just things you need to manage. They're not deal breakers, and they can definitely be worked around, and you can still have a very, very good horse that can last a long time, even if they do have some health concerns going on. And before we wrap up, I did want to go through just a quick list of red flags, just so you're aware of things that if you see them, maybe move on. Aggressiveness. So if they have any signs of biting, kicking, charging, any kind of aggression towards humans or other animals, not great. If they're nervous, if they seem really anxious, they spook at a lot of things, and just you kind of get a nervous vibe from them, red flag. If they're kind of inconsistent in their behavior, they're kind of unpredictable. If they're difficult to handle, again, going back to little things like being led and haltered, getting saddled, groomed when you get on them. If they're difficult in any of that, that's a red flag. If they have any refusal to work, so if they balk, if they rear, if they kind of try to dance around, not great. Visible lameness. So again, what we just talked about, they might have some issues. If a horse is really lame, you probably shouldn't be riding it. If you like the horse, get the opinion of a reputable vet to kind of see if you should proceed with a purchase or not. if they're in poor condition, and this goes back to whether or not you can trust the seller. Like if this horse is really, really underweight, has a poor coat condition, like there's probably something going on there. I would be leery about that. If they have really bad hoof problems, again, I did mention some horses do require specific trimming and shoeing, not the end of the world. But if it's really bad, like if there's neglect from the current owner, or just like really bad cracks, and if they've foundered and their feet are just a mess, move on. If you notice any like heavy breathing, if they're coughing a lot, if they have nasal or eye discharge, probably not great. If there's any like marks on their body, if there's any like bumps or like really big scars, I would at least question that. Definitely a red flag. If you ask about their health and the seller is not completely honest with you or completely open with you, that move on, don't even bother. Yeah, I have a whole list of seller red flags, but get the help of a professional and you'll bypass that. If they haven't had a lot of consistent training, consistent riding, that would be an issue. If their training isn't really matched for a beginner, like I don't think we should be getting off the track thoroughbreds for beginners. Not great. Some of those really high-end disciplines, even older, more experienced horses in those disciplines aren't going to be great. If they're hard to catch, again, not a deal breaker, but just something to watch out for. If there's other red flags on top of that, poor ground manners, they're bad to mount. Yeah, those are definitely some of the red flags that I would watch out for. So again, we want a horse that is quiet, that is relatively well behaved, has had a decent track record of training and experience, and that doesn't really relate to any specific discipline or breed for that matter. I'm not going to tell you that you need to buy a quarter horse because they're super quiet and avoid thoroughbreds because they tend to be hotter. That's not the case at all. Especially when you're beginning, you may not necessarily know what direction you want to go with your riding because you've never done it before. Just looking for an all-around horse is what we're aiming for with this. We want something that's pleasant to work with, something that's not going to cause a whole lot of issues. And again, I'm going to say it again and again, seek the help of a professional, someone that you can trust, who can help point you in the right direction. And with that, be sure to follow me everywhere at Strong in the Saddle. And until next time, remember, it's always a good day to ride.